Yo, what is going on, guys? Today I'm bringing you a video explaining mutated expeditions, everything you know about from the gear score to the gems to what you get from them and which ones to focus on. Starting out, we're going to look at where you can find the dungeons on the map. In Brimstones, the need is right here. Shadow Mountain has Tempest up here. We have Forge and Tarn in Greatcleave. Eden Grove has Garden of Genesis. Morningdale has no dungeon. Restless Shores has Depths. Weaver Fens has nothing. Breakwater, you get access to Lazarus. Windsward has no dungeon. The Elysian Wilds, you have Savage Divine. Cutlass Keys has BB. Monarchs has no dungeon. Ebonskill has Dynasty Shipyard. Everfall has Starstone Barrows. And Brightwood has nothing. Each week, 3 of these dungeons will be mutated. If you want to see them quickly, you click activities up here and click on mutated expeditions and it'll show you which 3 dungeons are mutated. It will then tell you that you can click on either of the dungeons like this and you can see M1, M2 and M3. In order to unlock M1, you need to first do the regular dungeon if you wish to host a lobby. But if you don't unlock it, you can still click view lobby and see any lobby that's been created for this dungeon. Once you do a dungeon, it will tell you the gear score recommended, 650 plus 65. Now these gear scores up here are extremely important. When you are below this gear score, you will take considerably more damage and do a lot less damage. So making sure you're above the recommended gear score is very important, way more important than you may think. And M2 is 675 and M3 is 695. Then you also will have these rankings. This, you will get a cache that will come into your inventory right up here. I don't have one, but there'll be a cache right here. And depending on how good you do in the dungeon, you'll get more rewards. How do you get higher ranks? In each dungeon, dying less, doing the dungeon in a quick amount of time, so not taking very long to do said dungeon, and killing all the mobs, mining all the ore will give you extra points as well, contributing to you gaining a higher rank. In order to unlock the next difficulty, you need to have silver rank to unlock the next difficulty. The difficulty difference between M1 and 2 is decent. M1 is generally pretty easy. As long as you are a decently high gear score, you can generally run M1 without any problem. M2 definitely starts to get a bit harder. This is when you need to start focusing on the mutation effects, more into that later. And M3 is extremely difficult compared to M2. If M2 is like a level 6, M3 is like a level 10. Way harder than M2. So keep that in mind if you are wondering the difficulty of each mutation. Now let's go over the mutation effects. Each dungeon that is mutated will have an effect in M1, 2 effects in M2, and 3 effects in M3. Now you can come over here and read them. It'll tell you everything they do. So let's focus on Abyssal. Enemies deal 50% of all damage as void damage. So every enemy in this dungeon will deal 50% void damage. So it's very important to slot in gems for the correct mutation that you're going into. Do you need gems for M1? Generally not. It's not that hard. You can definitely skip gems for M1. Let's go over the other 3 perks. Creeping. On death, enemies cast a spell granting other enemies in the area empower, increasing their void damage by 50%. Now, these will be under the health bars of the enemy's name. Bosses cannot have these 3 buffs. They cannot have Creeping, Oblivion, or Paranoia. These are only on the basic NPCs. And they will display under their name tag if they have this buff. And not every enemy will have these buffs. Some enemies may have 0, enemies may have these. So just make sure you're checking the HP bar to discern if they have these buffs or not. For M2, you get another mutation buff. Enemies apply a stacking disease on hit, reducing incoming healing by 2.5 to 5% per stack. Enemies cast slicing beams that deal 30% base void damage when touched. These, once again, do not happen on every enemy. These are just certain enemies. You have to check their health bars to decide if they have it or not. And then for M3s, you get a curse. Now this is throughout the whole dungeon. This will happen in boss fights, clearing ads. No matter what you're doing, this will be occurring. And this is one of the major reasons why M3s are so difficult to deal with. Using abilities deplete a global affliction. When the affliction is depleted, a zone is casted on all players, which silences players in this area. After the affliction expires, the zones detonate, dealing 65% max health void damage to the players in the radius. This effect cannot be cleansed. While silence zones are active, all players lose natural mana regeneration. Standing in the silence zone grants 25 mana per 0.75 seconds. So making sure you understand what this does and how to avoid it is crucial, because when these things explode, like they said, they deal 65% of your max HP, and when you get hit by any other mob, you're basically one shot. Understanding how to avoid this and knowing which curse you'll be facing in the dungeon is crucial for increasing your chance of survival in that dungeon. Each mutation will have different mutated effects. So now if we go to depths, you will see now that it is of different 3. So each time you do a dungeon, these effects will change. So make sure you're reading each time you're doing it. Damage type will change depending on the dungeon. So enemies deal 50% of all damage as nature damage, whereas Starstone had all damage as void damage. So do keep that in mind. You will have to be switching your gems. More on that later. If you're wondering where you can see your gear score is right here. 685 is my current gear score, so I'll be able to do M1s and 2 comfortably, but not M3s. You can queue into mutated dungeons, such as this. I can queue, and then I can select my role, DPS, tank, or healer. Healers get a bonus cash, 100 gold, and 1000 faction tokens. Same with tanks, they get 100 coins and 1000 faction tokens. Sorry DPS, but you get nothing. You cannot queue into a dungeon you have not unlocked, so I did not unlock M3 here, so I cannot queue into it. So that is one of the major advantages in getting the silver rank. You can also queue into random mutations where you get this mutator bonus cash, an extra 150 coins and 10,000 faction tokens, extremely useful. Now for gemming, generally for M1s you can avoid having the correct gems, but if you do want to make the dungeon easier, I recommend slotting the elemental type for that dungeon. For M2s, you can get away with generally just running an amulet that has the protection of said dungeon with the gem inside. Void protection, you receive 15% less void damage, and then the gem will give you an additional 6%, so 21% damage reduction in total. Extremely useful. You can, if you want to see how much damage reduction you have for each element, you can come down here and it will tell you. So right now I have 25.7% void damage resistance. For M3s, I recommend getting that up to at least 40%. So for M3s, I recommend having the amulet that has the protection for said dungeon, 2 opal gems here, and then you'll generally need 3 to get that 40% baseline. You don't have to run tier 5 gems, by the way. Tier 4s or even 3s are fine. As long as you hit that 40% mark for M3s, you'll generally be good. So why do we do dungeons? It's a great question. Well, each dungeon drops an artifact. So Starstone Barrels has an artifact. It is this ring right here, Blood Drinker, one of my favorite rings in the whole game, and I highly recommend picking this up. Super strong, gives you 25% damage reduction though, but it gives you 25% lifesteal, allowing you to solo a lot of the content in the game. Extremely useful. And each dungeon will have its own artifact, so make sure each week when this resets, you check the 3 dungeons and look what artifact they drop to make sure you don't need it, or if you want it, I recommend going out and farming that as soon as possible, because if you don't, then you may have to wait 3 to 4 weeks to see it again, and that would absolutely suck. Why do we do M1s? M1s, just generally to farm the artifact. M2s will drop you higher gear score items, so the minimum gear score of an M2 dungeon will be 675. Same for an M3, it'll be 695 would be the minimum gear score it can drop. M3s drop more legendaries and better loot and more crafting materials than M2, but M2s are generally a good place to farm. That is simply because you get one of the best PvE armor sets in the game, the Azoth Crystal set. This gives you Enchanted Ward and Refreshing. Extremely two useful perks for PvE. If you are wondering, this does drop in light, medium, and heavy, so every build can run this, so I recommend picking this up by farming some nice M2s. Other good perks are for PvE are Elemental Aversion and Health, because the mobs do a lot of elemental damage, so Elemental Aversion can definitely come in clutch, and Health just to make it so you don't get one shot as often. But the reason why Enchanted Ward is so valuable is because a lot of the mobs will do light and heavy attacks, and that reduces all that damage by 4%. The only thing that this doesn't affect is abilities. Bosses won't have very many abilities, so Enchanted Ward is super good at reducing their overall damage. And Refreshing, it's just there to increase your overall DPS. Another very important set I recommend farming when the mutation is up will be Glacial Tarn. This drops one of the best PvP sets in the entire game. It comes with an illegal weapon perk combination, as it has Elemental Aversion and Enchanted Ward on it, which is impossible to get otherwise. So when Glacial Tarnish is up, I highly recommend farming it. but it only can drop in heavy. So if you're a medium or heavy user, it's perfect for you for PvP. Now I want to go over a few DPS combos and what generally to run for each class. For DPS, always try and slot the finisher. This increases your damage done by 15% against bleeding targets. And then you can slot whatever secondary you generally want here. It's just that 15% extra damage is huge for a lot of DPS classes. Another weapon that has that same type of damage bonus is the Inferno. This increases your damage by 15% when you hit a target within 15 meters. So super useful in increasing your overall damage. If you like using just one weapon, or you're not really into getting the highest overall damage, or you just like to chill, if you want to, let's say, run musket or bow or ice gauntlet, just slot like the finisher here, then just use the ice gauntlet the whole time. At least then you'll be doing 15% extra damage. Even though it's not optimal, you'll still be doing quite considerably more damage. The only thing healers will generally be running will be Life Staff paired with the Void Gauntlet. This is most healer builds. And then tanks can run a variety of things: SNS Greatsword, SNS Hammer, Flail and SNS, or a Greatsword and Hammer. Those are all very good options. Pick whichever one you want and go with it. If you are wondering the stat distribution, generally I'll just talk about con here. For a lot of new players, I recommend 100 con. This is a good safety net since this will allow you not to get one shot by a lot of mechanics. And while you're learning the game, it's a lot more fun not to die immediately. And plus, you'll be doing more damage if you're not dead. So I recommend 100 con just to make sure you're not dying and keeping yourself alive long while you learn the game. It's completely fine. Everybody dies a lot when they first start playing, so the 100 con helps with that quite a bit. Next, I wanted to discuss the consumables that you will need to bring dungeon. Bring your honing stones. Tier 2 and 3s are completely fine. They increase your weapon damage by 5 or 4% depending on which one you choose. Next up is coatings. Coatings give 15% additional damage against humans. Now there is a different type of coating for each type of mob game. So this one here is for ancients. This one here is for lost. So make sure you understand which damage type you'll be versing in the dungeon and bring the correct coating for that. In some dungeons, there can be 2 different enemy types. So some dungeons may have, let's say, corrupted and lost in the same dungeon. So do keep that in mind. Some dungeons may have 2 different enemy types. So make sure you're bringing the correct amount of coatings for said dungeon. This also only works on the weapon that you apply it. So let's say I apply it to my rapier here, then my ice gauntlet on my back bar will not get the additional 15% damage. That's only for coatings. For everything else, both weapons get the buffs, but for coatings, that's only the weapon you apply it on. Next up, we have ward potions. Increases damage absorption from loss by 10% for 40 minutes. Now, once again, you just need to make sure you have the correct ward potion for the dungeon that you will be doing. And you don't have to run tier 5 potions. You can run tier 3 and 4s. Those are completely fine. As long as you're getting some extra health, that's all that really matters. For food, I recommend hearty meals for DPS. Tanks just get some extra regen. You just pop this bad boy, eat it, you get some extra health regen until you get hit. But if you are a mana user like a healer or a mage, then you will need to run energizing hearty meal. Increases mana regeneration rate by 30% for 40 minutes, allowing you to have extra mana sustain. You will also need to make sure you bring your regen, health, and mana potions. Mana potions, even if you are a melee DPS, can come in useful because if you have this perk right here, when you drink a mana potion, you gain 15% of your base health, allowing you to have some extra sustain, keeping you alive longer. It also helps if your healer is not very good. These mana potions can come in completely clutch. Next up will be your attribute food. I recommend bringing in con food or the damage food of your choice. So dex, if I'm a rapier, dex would be fine, or intelligence. If I'm a rapier, your focus food. If you're a life staff, etc, etc. And the reason why you bring con food is simply because, well, if you're dying a lot or you're making mistakes, then the con food can help with your overall survivability, helping you die less and less. Next up, we have the drops. So you can get these material from the dungeons that drop. So here we have Amarine. This is Mutated material. This is Imperium. This is Starstone. This is Tempest. And once you have all those materials, you can come into your nearest gypsum kiln. These are in like Ebon Scale and Brimstone. You can scroll down here. And now we can trade out our material here for weapons that we wanted in the dungeon. So if you did not get the weapon that you wanted, or you've been farming and you've been getting extremely unlucky, you can just come in here, spend the material, and you'll see the 2 perks, and the 3rd perk will be completely random when you hit craft. You can also craft a legendary with a certain perk if you use the mutated material as well. So keep that in mind. You can also craft the heart runes if you have not been getting it, but you can just run regulars to grab heart runes, so this should not be a problem. Next up we have trophies. You go into your house, you press F to hit decorate, and you'll see on the right hand side of your screen the trophies. Basic corrupted combat trophy, 4% damage to corrupted. You can slot multiple trophies in here, 4% to lost, 4% to humans, and 4% to angry earth. You can slot each of these trophies in each of your houses, so 3 houses is 3 times 4, 12% extra damage to corrupted enemies. This is extremely useful in raising your overall damage, and I highly recommend picking up 3 houses just to slot these trophy buffs in so you can do more damage to all mobs in the game or whichever mob you're fighting. If you are poor and you can't afford the expensive houses, just buy the 5k houses. It's completely fine. You still get the same amount of trophy buffs. Still get 5 even if you buy a 5k house or a 20k house. So just make sure you buy those 3 houses so you can slot in your trophy buff. If you guys have any questions regarding Mutated Expeditions, please feel free to ask me down in the comments below. I will be streaming over on Twitch, so if you want to ask me there as well, make sure to come check that out. And with that, I hope you guys all have a fantastic day.